Welcome to 247 Real Talk. I'm your host, Julian Perry. It's a pleasure to be here with you for another week. I hope you had a great week and you're enjoying the beginning of your summer, which will go by before you know it, and we'll be back to winter for those of us who deal with the four seasons. This week, I'm going to talk a little bit, not necessarily related to last episode, but I'm going to talk about how the media and circumstances in life play a role in how society and how people put value on others' lives. If you want to find out exactly what I'm talking about, and I think you will, just hang in there, and I'll be right back. So welcome back to 247 Real Talk Podcast. Again, it's my pleasure to be here with you. I'm so thankful to have the opportunity to share my thoughts, to reach out to you, to get the interaction that I receive from you. This is a real honor and privilege that I don't take lightly, and I thank you all for your support, your continued support, the continuous growth of the channel and of the podcast and the conversations and the interest, all the wonderful things that are a part of this effort. What I do here and what many podcasters do, at least the ones who deal with serious life issues, is pour a lot of what we feel and see into what we think is important, hoping that others will join us and will start the conversation and change the narrative, and hopefully in a world that seems to be tumbling out of control, that we can have or restore some semblance of normalcy for ourselves and for generations to come. We're getting into this topic for this week, and it will not be a long one. I think it was, and forgive me if I'm off by a day or two, but I think it was June 11th. The world got the news that the Titan submarine was missing. We now know that it imploded. We now know that all the 5 lives were lost. And it's a very sad situation for their families, for people in the industry, their friends, just as anyone else who loses someone. Now, that might be the end of the story. But in my episode today, it's not. On June 14th, and if for those of you who are looking at the YouTube version of this podcast, if you see me looking sideways, I do have a screen on the side of me here that I keep notes on that I'm able to reference. There's actually a computer. I don't keep it in front of me. I prefer to have it there, at least for the moment. But the thing is, what I want to reference is, as I said, it was around June 11th that the Titan started out its journey. We have been captivated by the events. Some of us, including myself, checking often to see if there was any news, there was any hope. Many of us felt, even before we learned about the implosion, that there was no hope. Countries, United States, Canada, I think Britain, I'm not sure, but countries assisted in this search. I read yesterday that millions of dollars were spent in the effort. That I have no idea who will pay for it. They say that the company and the company itself that owned the sub will not foot the cost, so someone has to, right? But it was millions. But that's still not what I'm getting at. That was June 11th. The media has not stopped. We've heard about people giving opinions. We've heard about people who were supposed to go and didn't. I think yesterday I read a story about a father and son who were supposed to go on the sub, and I guess it was necessary to fill the sub with all five people to make it profitable. And at one point, they were offered a 50% discount. So instead of $250,000 a person, they were offered $125,000 a person. They refused. I think the man's son said something about what happens, or he said someone sent him a text saying it's not safe down there. They were replaced by another father and son who I believe probably paid the 250K each, who perished in this tragedy. So, in addition to what the world has gone through, in addition to the New York, I think it was a New York Coast Guard, a National Guard, or New York National Guard, United States Coast Guard, and other countries that went in there, scoured a huge area. Eventually found and I think as of yesterday, retrieved pieces of the sub. There has been a media that has been relentless in bringing this story, even trying to poke the bear on both sides of the story, right? They're trying to poke the bear into trying to show ways that the owner of the company was careless, and I've seen the video where they said he ignored the rules and regulations. He played by his own drum, or he danced to his own beat, whatever you want to call it. I know you're wondering where am I going with this? Well, let me tell you where I'm going with this now. On June 14th, 3 days after the Titan sub disappeared. I'm turning here. Just turn for a second while I get my facts right. There was a ship that capsized going from Libya to Italy with 700 migrants aboard. 104 were rescued. 82 bodies were found. 514, as of that story, were missing. And this is a story that, if you like people like us podcasts and news people who seek to know what's going out there, who do our research, happen to stumble by, or we're digging through our usual newsworthy stories and found. There has been no explosion in the media about 514 people missing, 104 rescued, and 82 dead. There has been no outcrying, outpouring of grief and pain and condolences. There has been no effort to identify. I think they only identified 200 and something of the people who are missing so far. There has been no collaborative world effort to help to search for these people, who I guess are by this point are obviously from June 14th and now are presumed dead, swallowed up by the same sea, the same type of body that the Titan went down in. There has been no memorial service. There has been no outcry. There has been no frenzy, like I said, by the media to fly over there and to cover the story, to interview people, to talk about what happened, to talk about why it happened, to talk about this. And this happens several times, or has happened several times over the past few years in different sizes, right? That body of water has claimed a lot of lives. So my point is, why is it that if you looked at mainstream media, most of you never even heard about the tragedy I'm talking about? Why is it that an effort, we have enough newscasters, everyone knows we have enough reporters, we have enough journalists, we have enough people that can continue to cover the Titan story, while others can be dispatched to cover this tragedy of this ship that capsized. But we heard nothing. Very little. You have to really search, and you get. I'm looking at the website. You have to find sort of non-mainstream media to find out more details about this terrible human tragedy. And that's my point of this episode today, that lives are not valued equally. Those migrants who lost their lives on that ship that capsized have no money, have no fame, and other than their families, probably very few people who know who they are. But they are human beings just like you and me. Just as I'm sitting here speaking to you and you're sitting there listening to me, they're human beings like us. And we would like to hope that no matter where we are in the world, if we ever encountered a tragedy, if there were a chance that we could be saved or we were alive, that the same effort that was put behind people who are billionaires will be put behind people who are worth pennies. But no. And that's my problem here. And this has nothing to do with the men who are billionaires. They're billionaires. This has to do with what society and how the media puts their spin and their touch on, and since they have our attention, since the mainstream media has worked to a point where we live in this social media world, we live in this world where we absorb what we see on our phones and what we hear on TV, and what we look at on TV, what we hear on the radio, and so they know that what will consume our minds is whatever they put out there. I'm pretty sure they evaluate what they put out there because they're not only existence, but the millions they get to put in pay and bonuses in their pockets every year has to do with advertising dollars. And the advertisers want to be on a channel where there's millions of viewers, right? Because they want their product to be seen. So these media outlets decide, okay, we're gonna run this story. It's gonna get high ratings. We're gonna get advertising dollars. We're all gonna continue to get richer than we are. Nobody wants to hear when they're collectively 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so 5 billionaires likely on a submarine, then a missing. Nobody wants to hear while that's going on about 700 migrants who took a boat and capsized. Probably trying to, they're refugees, maybe trying to escape from oppression or something, and 500 and something of them are missing. So who cares? We got these 5 dudes over here, man. You know how much money they're worth? And that's how we view life. We who didn't create life put value on each and every one of our lives. And this is, I didn't have to go to this story in Libya, or between this boat which is going between Libya and Italy, to find that. We live here in the United States. You will find it here. Pay attention to the small media outlets. Make an effort to go on Google and look at the smaller media outlets and see some of the stories they report. See some of the tragedies that people go through and no one hears about them. They get a little snippet in a newspaper that not many people read, compared to the millions and millions that watch our main stations, right? In New York here, it's Channel 2, Channel 4, Channel 7, Channel 11. Those are CNN, C-SPAN, ABC, NBC. Those are the big TV stations here, right? So we are sort of conditioned and controlled without even realizing it, that when we turn the news on, that's what we get. Recently, I've run into a lot of people who will tell me they don't watch the news. And I said, well, that's not good. You got to see what's going on. I'm beginning to look at it in a different way. I'm beginning to understand that there are news media's outlets out there that don't have the big backing, don't have the big dollars, but they're still real journalists looking for real stories and looking to expose the real truth to the world, not selecting. Because those little newspapers that gave the stories about this ship that went down also covered the Titan. So they looked at it in a global sense and said, here are the things that are going on in the news. John over here perished. Jimmy over there was hurt badly. Joanna over there is missing. One is a billionaire. One is a professional. and one is a hardworking mom with no notoriety. But to us, their lives are all worth the same. They're all worth covering. They're all newsworthy. They're all people who need your help or you need to know about their stories. The money is not the issue, but in mainstream media, it is. If you want to get covered, if you want to get coverage, if you have someone, and you hear comedians talk about this all the time, right? Because it's a reality, and they bring it up because it's so true that we to I think to survive they make fun of it because they don't know what else to do about it. It's a fact that if you have someone who is of a certain ethnicity and someone who's of a certain social economic status and they go missing, the effort to find them and the time between when they're reported missing and when this all-out frenzy search starts to look for them differs greatly in comparison to if you and I went missing. Our families will be in a frenzy. They probably run to the police, and the police will tell them, well, he's an adult, he has to be missing for 24 hours. You get one of these celebrities missing, you get one of these rich people missing, and the search starts right away. Why is that? Well, I know there are excuses like, well, that person has a lot of money, it might be a ransom, or maybe they just got fed up of everyone and decided to take a hiatus for a little while, which is the same thing I could do, right? But the difference is you decide, the media decides, the world decides, people in their minds decide values of life, who is worth looking for and who is not, who is worth paying attention to and who is not, who is worth feeling pain and sorrow for and who is not, whose story, if a rich person commits a murder, they talk about the pressures they were under. They talk about and investigating. There's this whole frenzy looking at the circumstances that led up to why would this billionaire who has all these things to live for, blah, 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 commit suicide or commit a murder. When a poor person commits the same murder, he's just a poor vagrant. He's a criminal. That's it. End of story. There's no look into that person's mental health, or the circumstances that led up to it, why it happened. In some cases, maybe they'll find out that governments, local, state, and federal governments across the country were responsible for letting this person slip through the crack when they had an opportunity to save them. But nobody's interested unless you find the journalists who are still fighting to report real news, who are creating or struggling in a media environment that is oppressing them, struggling to report news across the board. This whole thing bothered me because I felt very badly for those who perished on the Titan. I think we all did. I felt even worse for the 19-year-old kid who was on the Titan who didn't want to go, who repeatedly by his aunt's recount said he didn't want to go, but who was sort of coerced into going as a gift, a Father's Day gift, and to bond with his father. And of course, now they're in a bond to forever, right? Young kid who had a whole life ahead of him, forced into going, and he lost his life. The big difference there too with the average person is we wouldn't be having that conversation. Apart from the fact that many of us and many people I talk to will never even dare take that trip. And I don't get me wrong, I understand that there are people who are adventurers and people who seek to find out more about this planet we're in, and it's their life's work to go beyond what we see to find out what's out there. If that's your cup of tea, that's your cup of tea. But this kid didn't want to go. And he was sort of forced into going, forced to his death. If these people didn't have the money to go, they wouldn't have been on that sub. Right? So many of us are immediately eliminated from, in contention, even if you're an adventurer, even if you're one of those people who's willing to take that risk with their lives, if you couldn't afford it, you wouldn't have gone or been able to go on that trip. So it's not even an equal opportunity trip, right? It's a trip for rich people. Let's keep it real. But here we have these migrants whose families are crying. I looked at a picture on my screen. There was a brother weeping because he believes or he knew that his brother was on the ship and they have not found him. And he's likely dead. Weeping openly. There's no empathy for these people because there's no even report of their story in mainstream media where the world can become enraged and outraged at what's going on, where the world can see what the plight of these people who are oppressed, who are living in oppression, who are trying to escape, to have lives like you and I take for granted in the United States of America. These are not people who are leaving one place to go to another because they want to find a new place to commit a crime. These are not people who are running across the border and jumping on these ships where almost every single journey people die, and they're willing to take that risk for their lives and their whole family for an adventure. These are people who are going on these trips because it's the only way they can see at the point they're so oppressed, they're so much in fear, they're so much impoverished, they're so maybe hungry and malnourished and struggling and life is miserable. The life we take for granted here in the United States of America, the life that most people wake up into and with, with some effort, yes, can live a normal life, even if you're not rich, even if you're going to a regular job, but at a minimum wage, you can have a certain sense of normalcy. We have that built into our society. These are people who punish, and their lives have become so unbearable that they're willing to risk the lives of their children and their spouses and their parents and their siblings to take a trip that stories have already come back to them over and over again of these trips that happen pretty frequently in relatively and many times a lot of people don't make it. The ships are overloaded and they capsize. People fall overboard. People are shot. There's so much danger that you and I will not even consider when we get into our beds these nights and we cuddle up and we go to sleep. And they're willing to look at their in the eyes of their spouses and their helpless children who are at their mercy for protection, and they're willing to put them through this journey for the chance of a life. Of a life that represents just, even if it's just slightly better than the oppression and the pain and the unhappiness and the sadness that they experience every day where they live. Any one of us, based on our parents' travels and what happened to their lives, could have been born somewhere else. We could have been not lucky to be here in the United States. We could have been lucky, for those of us who have migrated here and made a life, we could have been not lucky enough to do that. We could have been part of an oppressed society somewhere in this world, but we can't see that. We're too busy enjoying where we are without being thankful for where we are. We're too busy enjoying where we are without considering those around the world who are dying every day in an effort to get to something better. But we've got these immigration stories, even in the United States of America here, and I understand that the society can't sustain an uncontrolled influx of migrants, but we also need to pay attention to why these people are running. Because in between the ones who have all sorts of ulterior motives, they're the ones who are living on the streets of Mexico where gangs control the streets, and every day they dodge bullets, and many times they lose family members over and over again just going to the corner store. The point is, we as society, those of us who have the ability and those of us who have been blessed enough to have a sense of normalcy, whatever we call that, need to find the same value in the billionaire as we do in the extremely poor. Because the common denominator there is obviously not money. It's human life. The guy who's a billionaire, we continue to support them. We go to their stores, their own businesses, and we continue to support them and try to get luxuries in our own lives at whatever level we can. And many times if you see a poor person in need and someone comes to you and say, we're trying to feed these poor people, will you donate? You say, I don't have any change on me. Oh, I don't have any money at this time. Oh, come back next week. But at the same time, you'll jump into your fancy car and you'll go to Macy's or you go to Walmart, whatever. I mean, the point is the owners are of those of establishments are rich, right? And you'll go and you'll spend your money. You'll spend hundreds of dollars when you could have used $10 to bring the value in someone's life to a place that you can't even understand. The appreciation that someone who is struggling day after day, doing the right thing, but it's under the circumstances that don't support them being uplifted, the appreciation they would feel for your attention, for your time to talk with them, to laugh with them, to give them a moment of joy in a life that's otherwise filled with misery, that has no monetary value, is more valuable than the billionaires and the actors and actresses and athletes who are all millionaires and billionaires that we revel over. We spend our hard-earned cash to go to their concerts and to go to their games. Imagine the amount of money these people make because we support them. When maybe this year we say, you know what, we're not going to go to these concerts. We're not going to go to these games. Not that they are not worthy of it, but we're going to let them know that this year, all that money collectively that we spend in the billions, we're going to look for good causes. We're going to look for people who are impoverished, who have fallen into circumstances many times without any effort on their own. And we're going to help them. We're going to tell the news media, we're going to start boycotting because we're going to do our own research. And if we see that you don't cover human lives in the same value, with the same value and the same intensity, then you're not reporting the news. You're reporting your bank account. And we're not interested. Before I end this episode, something crossed my mind as I thought about what I would talk about on this episode. I remember comedians saying that comedians in general have a dark place from within them, from where they come, from where the jokes come. A lot of them are living in a place where it's really dark because they see things through a different lens. As I look across, my research across podcasts and people who similarly do what I do in terms of a podcast, I realize that there are also different categories of us. They're the celebrities who announce their podcast, and the first episode they get millions of views because of who they are. There are people who do trendy stuff and they talk about items that or issues that. Or things, I want to say issues, but their content is happy-go-lucky, and there's nothing wrong with that. But as I looked across and paid more attention, I realized that there's a subset of us, and I'm including myself in that subset, who see the dark places and who feel this inherent need to bring them to light, who find purpose in bringing the stories and the issues that we all try to shy away from and turn our backs on because we are so fearful of facing our truths, and we're so not into helping. We know that when you start to get to the point where you recognize the actual pains in this world, when you recognize the places of shortcomings that really need our help as human beings for us to live that life of value, which I believe we were created to do, helping each other and bringing each other up to a level where as many of us as possible can enjoy this thing called life, or at least can live it in a place that's bearable. When you seek those stories, you find dark places. 247 Real Talk Podcast, I hope that one day the whole world is listening to me. But as I don't have that notoriety of an athlete or a superstar, that's a long journey. But what is painfully clear to me is that the value in what podcasts like myself and others who seek the real stories and seek those dark places to bring them to life, the value in our podcast in the reality of who we are when you strip away all the worldly possessions. It's real. And it's the reason that we do this and go to these places that personally affect us, to bring the stories, to bring life to lives that would otherwise remain in the dark, and to engage you to become part of the solution and add real value to the lives of yourselves and those around us as we go along this journey. It's always an absolute pleasure to be here with you, and I am so thankful. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I look forward to seeing you and chatting with you again next week. Until then, please subscribe, share, take care of yourselves and each other.